The famous French diplomat and advisor to Napoleon, Talleyrand, remarked, "A diplomat who says yes means maybe. A diplomat who says maybe means no. And a diplomat who says no is no diplomat," illustrating that in 1800 as today, how you communicate defines how your message is received. So it seemed an opportune time to talk to the founder and CEO of one of the world's leading financial marketing and communications firms, Prosek Partners, especially since this year the Wall Street Journal named you as one of the world's most influential decision makers. And on a flying visit to London, I'm delighted to have Jen Prosek with me for today's conversation. Jen, a very warm, wintry welcome to you today.
So happy to be here.
Well, Prosek Partners have been very helpful to us at the Money Maze podcast, and we're very grateful with your colleagues in London and the US in introducing us to some amazing guests. So thank you. And under your guidance, Prosek, created over 25 years ago, has developed into this world-class communications firm. And I'm hoping today that we'll learn some valuable lessons about improving the way we communicate, given it's your speciality and because you're always in conversations with leading figures in finance and other industries. But before we talk about the inspiration and perspiration behind the firm, let's go back to Jen and the early years. What stays with you most about your upbringing?
Well, I am first generation American, which means my parents were immigrants. So in many ways, I am a product of the American dream. My parents reminded me how lucky I was to be in the United States and have infinite opportunity in front of me. So I think that certainly shaped my outlook, my entrepreneurial outlook, et cetera. I would also say, if you talk to most entrepreneurs, they are driven by something. And I was certainly driven by two parents who were teachers who struggled to pay the bills. So certainly that was part of my ambition. And the idea of business school came from my roommate, my post-college roommate. I was living with two roommates. She was going to Columbia Business School. Her employer was funding it. And she said, "You should go to business school and everyone will think you're really deep in finance." And I said, "There's no way I could hack that." She said, "Yes, you can." So she was my catalyst to deciding to go to a top-tier business school. So I graduate business school. Now I have cred in the finance world. And I will say there was magic to the business school degree. There's very few MBAs in finance that run communications firms or in communications. So I definitely had something that distinguished me. And still, when I graduated in 1999, the financial services firms were not exactly buying the vision, which was get on the front foot, care about your reputation, be proactive, care about your brand. But the financial crisis hit and everything changed. Most people remember that in the financial crisis, for the first time, hedge funds, banks, et cetera, were on the radar screen, and not in a good way. And they had to really rethink, does this back foot stuff work? And if you remember, Goldman Sachs famously decided, let's get off the back foot, get on the front foot. They hired communicators from the White House and other places. And the strategy changed and they decided to engage and they decided to care about their digital footprint and their communications and their content and all this stuff. And the world kind of watched that and said, hey, wait a minute, maybe this back foot thing doesn't work anymore. Maybe we should care about our brand. Maybe we should engage with our publics and our stakeholders. And that catalyst was huge for our firm because those firms went to the communications market and said, who builds brands? Who engages? Who's proactive? And there was nobody but us. And we had grown up with that mission to represent those companies. So that was really when the business started to explode.
Numbers today, you are how many people and how many
360 people. Oh, probably 6 offices. And, as global as you need to be for serving financial companies.
So let's start with this question of branding an asset manager, PE firm, hedge fund.
Yes.
How do you approach it?
So as you know, we made this big bet on financial services firms, but we made also an early bet on the private markets, which was really not understood. Like, if you looked at the financial landscape and you said, who's spending money in marketing communications? The private markets firms, meaning private equity, private credit, hedge fund, private asset management firms, they were the laggards of the laggards. They did not believe that marketing was something that you did proactively. And if you recall, I don't know, 10 years ago, if you went to a website, if there really even was one in the hedge fund space or the PE space, it had a little box and said, enter the code or go away. They were trying to turn down anyone who was interested versus attract attention. But we said, again, we think that's going to change. And we saw firms like Blackstone be very, very early adopters to our belief system, which was a proactive one, right? And we just thought that whole world would change too. And it really has. I can't even tell you the acceleration in the private markets in terms of caring about brand and digital and content and thought leadership. And of course, reputation management and sort of crisis communications, of course, deal communications, of course, but really sophisticated marketing.
So there's an optics component, but there's a very real commercial component. So let's just talk about how that brand and digital marketing helps a fundraise.
Yeah. Well, again, one of the ways we tried to distinguish ourselves as a firm was to get very, very close to the money. That's what Money Maze is all about, right? Being very close to the money. And in the private markets world, being close to the money means understanding the fundraising process down to the nub, understanding where those allocators go, how they behave, what they read, which conferences they go to, how they tick, and how to show up in front of them in a way that builds preference for a private markets brand. So that is a journey we've been on for a very, very long time. It is the most competitive fundraising market that we've ever seen. So firms are very open to trying new things and being creative and being on the front foot with their marketing now in front of these LPs because it's so hard.
So you talked a few years back about this being the emerging market of marketing. On that growth curve, where are we?
Yeah. So again, we always say we predicted the emerging market of marketing, which was private markets firms. I would say we're 50% of the way through that emerging market, and it's emerging so fast. And realize that COVID was a massive accelerator because when everyone's business shut down, deal makers and fundraisers were sitting behind a screen going, OMG, how am I going to raise money or do a deal behind a screen? And like everyone running a business, that was a pretty scary moment. And all of these firms smartly got very serious about digital, audio, video, all the ways to communicate in a virtual world, right? And a lot of spend went into what I would call sophisticated marketing. And that really accelerated that emerging market of marketing much faster than I would have even predicted.
So it'd be really helpful. I'm sure lots of our listeners are taking notes as they absorb your pearls of wisdom here. But if you can give us an example of one of the firms you've worked with and how you really were able to facilitate, their push forward.
Yeah, well, I think, they probably don't like us speaking too publicly like all of our clients, but I would say, the case study that we have our name associated with that is most known. And again, the work we do is very public. So we're on press releases, et cetera. People know who represents who. It's probably Bridgewater Associates. We've been on a 13-year journey with them to build their brand. And again, it was very important to them when we were hired that their culture of radical truth and transparency be properly understood in the market. So we've been on that journey. I don't want to talk too deeply about their strategy because that would be inappropriate, but that would just be one example of a firm we've worked with for a very long time, who I give a lot of credit to, was an early adopter to the idea of, managing their story, managing their reputation, very much on the front foot, taking what is unique and distinctive about the firm and amplifying that to key audiences. If you talk to people, they also have one of the best, IR departments in the world, which means they're great communicators directly to their investors as well. So I think I give them a lot of credit. People often ask me why they've been very successful in their brand building mission. And I say two things. They are incredibly experimental and creative. and their founder took this extremely seriously. And those things obviously help.
Well, we had Karen Tambour earlier in the year on an episode, and she was terrific. And the episode continues to get a lot of attraction.
She is terrific.
Yeah. So that was great. So let's take it the step down, which is we're in a world which some of us of a certain age just about understand in terms of social media, and we've obviously added, as a podcast business that's doing, a lot of things. We've added skills through people who understand this social media world. You just conducted a survey of 105 top finance firms, and I'm quite interested in what the overriding conclusion was.
The overriding conclusion, which made me very happy, of course, is it just validated exactly what I've been talking about, that private markets firms are taking this extremely seriously, that no longer, it's very gratifying. I used to have to convince people that what we do made an impact. There is a very high level of belief that what we do impacts three things that are most important, especially to the private markets: talent, deals, and capital. If you want to accelerate, your ability to hire the best and the brightest, if you want to increase your sourcing and do great deals and have people come to you, if you want to raise money in the most successful manner, you need to show up professionally and have your brand be strong. Those things are universally now believed in, which is extremely gratifying to me.
And actually, we had also earlier on the year, General Nick Carter, who was former head of the British Army, who then recommended this book called War in 140 Characters. And we haven't read it, and we put it on the list. It talks about how communication is the other part of the battlefield. And it gives this Palestinian-Israeli sort of set of illustrations, which is remarkable for those of us who are less familiar with the potency of the medium. But I'd like to talk about audio and video. We're here recording audio, but we'll have this on YouTube as well, which is a growing part of what we're doing. How are you advising your clients on those mediums?
Well, clearly, video, we all know the numbers, right? Video is what most people, institutional or consumer, want to consume. So if you're not using video to your advantage, you should be thinking about it. Audio has also struck me personally, the power of audio. I don't need to tell you, we're dealing with very busy people, and the ability to listen while you are commuting or while you are doing something else. I've been stunned at the podcasts, for instance, I do, like this one, that people will listen to the 45th minute. And the reason I know that is because they'll say, I love what you said about XYZ. And I'm like, wow, that was in the 45th minute. So there's a relationship and an intimacy in podcasting that I think is extremely special and powerful. So, but I would say you can look at the data. It's very clear that these are very successful mediums of communication, but I would say you also got to feel it. And you have to experiment with different things to be successful in communications, because the thing you think is going to cut through isn't always the thing that does.
So I'm just going to say to all of our listeners, the 46th minute, Jen is going to have some fantastic advice for all listening. Of us. Now, I am struck as I go on my travels that the PowerPoint presentation lands on the desk relentlessly. And I'm thinking, gosh, I'm of a certain vintage, but even I'm wondering if that might be a bit dated. Can we talk about the pitch and both the time, because people do love their own voices, I'll be quiet, and what advice have you got about that ecosystem?
Well, our world is still pretty addicted to the deck. I've never been to a meeting where I didn't bring one, because that's kind of what is understood. Having said that, everything about marketing is being distinctive. I always say the most important thing you do is nailing the narrative. What is it about you that is distinctive, exciting, moves someone emotionally to buy something for you or builds preference in your brand, right? So the first exercise is nailing the narrative. And then it's like, how do I deliver that? What medium is the most effective? And I don't think the deck is dead by any standpoint, but I do think breaking through with a deck is impossible. So you want to think about other things. So we've been experimenting. Audio is a great example. We've been experimenting with something we call the first meeting, which is a podcast kind of format, between a PM and a host that talks about the investment strategy in a different way, not in a way that you present it in a deck with a bunch of charts, but in a human, authentic, connecting, relationship-oriented conversation. We have been experimenting with advancing those things to LPs and seeing, are they more willing to listen to a chat with a PM about the strategy and the firm and the culture, et cetera, or does that break through? I wouldn't say I have all the evidence, but I would say anything that's distinctive can be very powerful. So experiment. Video and audio are two wonderful ways to do that.
Well, we've found, as we've been lucky enough to have lots of requests to be on the show, a lot of which we can't accommodate, we've launched a second channel, the Curated Podcast, where we're doing exactly that for organizations. And the CEOs and fundraisers have said that they found it very powerful, that both because they can pre-screen, they don't have to necessarily get on a plane to some of the destinations, and when they have that next conversation, people are in a better state of understanding, and so the quality of the questions can change, and so that's significant. But just one more thing before we leave that, and that is, I've heard you say that you would not, or you would actively discourage a leader to talk for more than 15 minutes.
Oh, well, I think that brevity and nailing the narrative again is super important. You need to be able to make your points relatively quickly. I do want to touch upon another thing that survey told us, though. The transformation in some of these communications channels, I'll just pick on one, like LinkedIn. LinkedIn used to be viewed by our clients as a place where people are trying to get jobs or whatever perception they had. The reality is LinkedIn has become a way to communicate to target audiences, including institutional investors. They are on LinkedIn on a regular basis and build a relationship and show the momentum of your firm. You will see, I think one of the most interesting things is that there are founders like Orlando Bravo. I would encourage you to look at his social media presence and his LinkedIn that are spending a lot of time on LinkedIn and building direct relationships with investors or potential talent, et cetera, using LinkedIn. And they're not spending that much time and possibly money doing that because it's unsuccessful. I would say, in our world, we talk about three types of media: earned media, owned media, and paid media. Earned media is sort of what people think traditionally as dealing with the press. I tell my story through that third party. Owned media are the channels you own, your website, your LinkedIn feed, anything that goes direct to the audience. Those owned channels can be so powerful. And I think even in the private markets, folks are understanding now, wow, building a relationship directly with my audience is so powerful. And then paid media is advertising, what people sort of think. So I experimented, for instance, with launching a LinkedIn newsletter called Leadership in Volatile Times. I started it in the pandemic. I didn't want to just speak about communications. I wanted to speak about leading people. And I thought I'd do a 6-part series just to sort of experiment. I also thought Volatile Times won't last that long. Boy, was I wrong. I'm still writing it. But that newsletter has taught even me how powerful it is to have a direct channel to your audience. I just met with someone for breakfast who I would love to work with. And she said, I've loved reading your LinkedIn newsletter. So you already have a relationship with someone. They already know you. They're following your content. They like what you read. They like your thoughts. So those things are very, very powerful. And the shift in private markets toward embracing those channels has been mesmerizing.
So we know COVID changed habits, and we know that the hybrid and the sort of the multi-platform approach exists. But I guess in a world that has jumped onto video for conversations, to Zoom or not to Zoom, that is the question.
Well, we're all struggling with the hybrid world. And I would just say that I think Zoom has created a really awesome option. Not every meeting must be in person. I think the trick now is, like everything, you need it to have a hell of a lot of judgment to know, is it a Zoom or is it an in-person? I do think if it's a relationship you're trying to have for the long term, showing up in person means I care And showing up in person means you're probably going to have a more intimate, personal conversation with a human being. Zoom is very transactional. Having said that, I think that Zoom has created a very efficient way to get a lot done. The issue is, and I'm surprised you don't see me carting around my computer, if you have in-person and Zoom, how do you do that? It's become very difficult to do. And now we have to sort of rely on the fact that all the people that work for us can actually decide, is this in person or is this Zoom? So I think we're in a very unprecedented time in the world where we still haven't figured out exactly how to behave. But I think there is room for both.
So you've used the term volatile to characterize today. I would perhaps, because of my more bearish view, would say we're in for a potentially prolonged period of a difficult environment, which will be reflected in returns, in which case, asset managers won't necessarily have the prop of good performance. Communication becomes even more important, as does leadership. Tell me, having this constant dialogue with so many leaders, what do you characterize as the qualities, in the very, very good leaders?
Yes. Well, I think what is expected out of your employee base as a good leader has changed dramatically. And I would say, if you ask me what are the largest challenges for my clients, my leadership clients, my CEOs and founders, a lot of it is around leadership, and a lot of it is around employee relations, and a lot of it is about how do I inspire and motivate people. It's very different than it was a few years ago, right? So you hear a lot about the buzzwords authentic leadership, for instance. People do want to build a different kind of relationship with their leaders, and those who can be a little more human, show that, a little more vulnerability, be a little more honest, be a little more transparent, over communicate. Those are the people who will do better, I think, in terms of the talent situation. I think, like even when you think about investors or shareholders, I think burden of more transparency and more communications is definitely there. So one of the reasons the sort of what I would call the PR economy or the communications economy is so vibrant is so many leaders are adjusting to the requirements of being a leader. And I would say, for instance, I think you could get away with not being a good communicator years ago. You could get away with not having to ever get on stage. You get away with all that. But this is now a requirement of the job.
So you lead a large and growing organization, and you have a number of, I'm going to say, catchphrases. And one of them I want you to explain is you talk to your team about being a finder, minder, buyer, grinder. Now, just explain that.
Finder, minder, binder, grinder. So, in my world, which is the world of consultancy, I always say if you want to get to partner at the firm, you have to be a finder, minder, binder, grinder. What is that? We're all grinders. That's getting the work done. There's a hell of a lot of work to get done. And the more senior you get, at least at my firm, it doesn't mean you're not a grinder. You still are. A binder is someone who's a great relationship person. We are in a relationship field, and you need to be able to bind as a human being with clients. Minders are great managers of people and also of work. In our firm, you have to be a great manager to get ahead, because grooming the next generation of talent is vital for us. And finding is business development. Finders are obviously get to the top quicker than others. And if you have all four of those things working at the same level, you're a unicorn. Most people have a different percentage of new bucket, but it's been an easy way for me to describe what's important in a firm like ours.
And when you look at your firm and its growth, and then you look ahead, where would you like to see Prosek, in the next few years?
Yeah. So we have been growing relatively quickly, again, because what we were selling, we were very unpopular at the dance, and all of a sudden we got popular, right? So I think the trick is I don't really have a growth number or size. Being bigger isn't always better. I always say we want enough growth to fuel the careers of our people. I remember one of my favorite lines, and I think it was Sheryl Sandberg's book, is I think Larry Summers told her about Google when she joined there. If you're offered a seat on a rocket ship, just take it, because at growth companies, careers take care of themselves. And I do believe growth fuels opportunity, it fuels careers, it fuels excitement. One of my primary jobs is to keep the grit, hustle, and humanity we had when we were small into every day we come to work when we get bigger. So I think I'm more focused on maintaining the culture of Prosek, and I call us the army of entrepreneurs, maintaining our sort of entrepreneurial vibe and our special culture as we grow. The reality is, again, we're halfway through the emerging market of marketing. If we can remain a preferred firm in the space, we will have growth because we are mining growth companies. So, we have two types of clients, either a well-established, mature, global, publicly traded financial institution or the private market space. The global corporate side of our world is not an emerging market, it's a mature one. So we just have to be better than everyone else to keep getting those clients. In the emerging market of marketing, that is a true emerging market. So the growth opportunity is really big. So the challenge is just to grow with excellence and keep our culture.
So you talked about this motivation and culture, and I've known that you've done some work, around entrepreneurialism generally, and I want to just start with sort of the higher level. You made an observation about, I'm not sure I understood it, but millennials grew up on Harry Potter and the Generation Z grew up on the Hunger Games, and I'm not quite sure how I unpick that.
Yes, and I'm trying to remember the context of that. But I think that was actually probably in relation to the outlook of the generations. Growing up on Harry Potter is very sort of whimsical and fun and fanciful, and growing up on the Hunger Games is actually quite dark. So I think I was talking about the outlooks of some of the different generations in that comment.
Right. Now, amongst some of your, I would say, key beliefs, and when we met in New York, you talked about it, and I've heard you talk about it, is that if there were two words that you would emblazon on any of your employees and others' heads, it would be just ask.
Yes. So I believe the two most powerful words in business are just ask. As a woman in her 20s who was building a firm, who was always way over my skis, I learned very quickly that asking for what you want is really important. And I was stunned that over 50% of the time I asked for something, I got it. Now, there is an art to the ask. There's a timing, an appropriateness. You have to have high EQ to get your ask right. And you can't be grabby, but knowing how to ask and when to ask and asking is incredibly important. I tell my daughter at school, advocate for yourself. It's sort of a version of that. But if you can figure out how to ask for what you want appropriately, I think you'll be surprised how much you get in return.
So, and when you've had a bad meeting, how have you managed to deploy that?
Meaning, if I've had a bad ask?
Yeah, you've not been Jen Prosek on her best game.
Yeah. Well, listen, I always say one of the greatest things about being an entrepreneur is I have gone around my whole career just being me and just doing Jen, and it either works out or it doesn't work out. And I read this book one time about the voice inside your head. And it was called How to Be 10% Happier. And the guy who wrote it realized he had a very negative voice inside his head. So if he screwed up, the voice inside his head said, "You're a screw up." If someone else got a promotion, the voice inside his head said, "Why is he getting it versus me?" What I realized when I read that book is I have the most awesome voice inside my head. I think I was born with it. I can't give myself credit. It's a really nice voice. When I screw up, my voice inside my head said, "You did your best." If my best friend gets a promotion, the voice inside my head says, "Oh my God, that's awesome for you." I am generally a positive outlook person, but I do have failures. I'm dealing with one now. And I think if you've done your best and you've communicated honestly with everyone around you about how you would have done it differently, and that you're not trying to sort of spin your failures, sometimes those are the most powerful moments with your friends, your family, or your employees. Like the boss screws up too, and boy, did I screw up. And I think that's actually been one of the most powerful things about my leadership is people have always connected with the fact that I'm not afraid to say when I've failed, and I fail too.
Well, I was giving a talk at Exeter University recently, and it reminded me when I was being asked about interviewing and dealing with difficult situations back a long time ago at Morgan Stanley. I interviewed a young graduate from Columbia, and he was very enthusiastic. And for some reason, I was carrying a cup of coffee, and he shook my hand when he came in so vigorously, the coffee went down my white shirt. So it could have been a disaster. And he smiled and looked at me and said, you never get a second chance to make a first impression. At which point I was endeared to him, and we ended up hiring him. So there you go. The other issue which relates to what you just talked about is this expression, solve, don't dwell. And how do you impart that with your team?
Yes. Another thing I think is so important is spending all your emotional energy on solving a problem, not on dwelling on it. So I tell my team, look, if something really bad happens, I'm not unrealistic. Go to the bar, have a drink, lick your wounds. But the reality is it's generally completely unproductive to spend your emotional energy on dwelling on something you cannot control. It is totally productive to put all your time into the solve. How's it not going to happen again? How am I going to fix it? And I think that has to do with all kinds of things, even relationships. Do you walk away from a relationship and just get angry and dwell on it? Or do you actually confront the person, tell them you're sorry, and make it better? So I think that, to me, is one of the greatest secrets of success.
So I'm going to move to some general questions, which, as we know, because all our audience is still listening to this podcast, they are waiting for this. If you could wake up with a skill tomorrow that you don't have, what would it be?
Oh boy, skiing the bumps.
Moguls, okay. Well, that's I love skiing.
I watch that and I'm like, boy,
we do know bumps.
Wouldn't it be cool to be a female bump skier?
Yeah, absolutely. One just needs the knees to be able to do right. that. But when you've had setbacks on your career, what would you say you've learned most from it or them?
You'll find that I have so many twists of phrase and campaigns. It's almost sort of brutal, but this one sounds negative, but it has worked for me. If you're like me, you go around your life in business and personal, generally trusting human beings. Again, I'm an optimist. I'm very positive, but every once in a while, you bump into a person who's not, their goal in life is not to help you out. That's happened a few times where I've realized, oh, wow, there's something in my back and it doesn't feel very good. And it looks like a knife. And I would say I developed this idea, and I think it's maybe also sort of a female idea, but it's called make your enemy your energy. Like, how do you get fueled by people who tell you you can't do something? How do you get fueled by challenges? How do you get fueled by disappointments? And I think if you are able to turn bad luck moments into good luck moments, boy, you're going to be in a great place in life. And I think there's a lot of talk, certainly there always are around in women's circles around glass ceilings and disappointments and sort of discrimination. I think if you can get past those things and put some energy toward how do I prove to them they're wrong? How do I climb that mountain when everybody said I couldn't? That's really powerful. So I would say that's just one way I've gotten over my disappointments.
And again, we have this important youthful cohort listening, and they will listen and they will be struck by your entrepreneurialism and success and persistence. But financial services, communications, because you also advise on pharmaceutical, healthcare, other businesses as well. Young people thinking about careers and going, oh my gosh. What's the sort of the high level advice you'd offer?
Find something that gets you out of bed and you're partially excited about. Find something that when you're working at it, it doesn't feel like work. Because if you can do that, you will naturally work harder than other people around you because you like it. And if you are working harder than other people around you because you like it and you're passionate about it, you're generally going to get farther. So one of the things I am most proud of in my career is after business school, 99.9% of my colleagues were going into investment banking or consulting. And I felt like the herd, I should do that too. I was already running my small PR firm. It wasn't very sexy. And I got myself an offer at 2 major investment banks to join their analyst program. And I had accepted one of them. And I woke up the next day after accepting and I called and I said, I can't do it. And it's the to thine own self be true. I just decided I could be a very mediocre banker or I could be a killer financial communications person. And I should stick with what I'm good at and what fuels me. Sometimes there is a lot of pressure to feel like I should be a banker because everyone else is, or I should do this because everyone said I should. You should find that thing, even if it's unpopular, even if it's not sexy, that gets you excited because that is if you want a career, not a job. And I always wanted a career, not a job.
So my final question is, you meet all sorts of extraordinarily interesting people on your travels. Who's the person you're yet to meet that you would want to sit down and have dinner with?
Boy, I will say that one of the great pleasures of my job is I always say I get to travel the halls of the most incredible institutions and meet the most amazing people. I think my clients are the most successful, innovative, amazing people on the planet. And it's what fuels me. I love my job because of it. But who would I love to meet? There's a bunch of people, I guess, but I always still thought I'd like to meet Barack Obama. I actually did meet him quickly. I was at a hotel. It's a great story. I was at a hotel. I got up at 5 a.m. to go for a run. There were Secret Service around the hotel, but it wasn't overwhelming. I went into the gym. There's no one in there. I get on the treadmill. Then a guy gets next to me and he's running. And I look over and it's like President Obama on the treadmill right next to me. And so we had a little chit chat afterward. But I read Michelle Obama's book and I just felt like I wouldn't mind meeting the Obamas.
Isn't that funny? I was in Berlin and he happened to be there. I went to the gym in the morning and there were 2 of the most enormous blokes I'd ever seen, almost blocking the way, but I was let in. I was in the gym and he had this minder and I thought, I'm going to shake his hand. I'm going to shake his hand. And every time I moved towards him, the minder would sort of make sure. And eventually went to the water cooler and so did I. And I got to shake his hand. So you see, there we go.
I was stunned by how little security there was and how friendly he was. And this was right before he ran, I think, for his second term. And he sort of looked at me on the treadmill and he looked at my face and like, I recognize that you're Barack Obama. And he said, you got to stay in shape. And I said to him, you got to win.
Yeah, well, there you go. And my memory was he was in great shape.
Yeah, he's in great shape.
Oh, my gosh. Yeah. Well, Jem, we're going to close this conversation. And I know that people, because it's been a different conversation on the Money Maze podcast, and yet you're absolutely woven into the thread of these financial firms. And you see things that others don't axiomatically because of where you sit. So lots of great advice. I've just written down the 2 that I want to requote, which is nail the narrative. Because there is a lot of fluff and excess in the business and in the sort of the language that's used that sounds very clever, but that's number 1. And make your energy your enemy.
Your enemy, your energy.
I'm going to get that right. That's right. Make your energy your enemy. I'll get that right by the time I've recast that and said it again twice before the editor. Jen, it's been terrific seeing you here today. Thank you for your help on behalf of the Money Maze podcast. You are clearly, you are building, running a great business, and it's been a pleasure to spend time with you.
Thank you. And I must say, the Money Maze podcast is a must listen for all my clients and for me. So I'm thrilled to be here and super honored. Thank you.